Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial on how to freehand scrolls. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video. Okay, so you may have spotted from the title that we are going to be trying to work on freehanding the scrolls, so like these little bits of parchments and scroll work which are on so many of the models. So I always paint them up so they look like parchment, although in reality they'd probably be moulded or made from something else so that they last a bit better. But what we want to be doing initially is sketching out roughly the shape that you want. So I'm going to show you on a piece of paper how I do this. So if I'm painting onto a miniature, I would use a pencil straight away to do the basic shape of it. I always have to do those parts downwards because it's easier drawing down than it is side to side. So you get the rough idea of where the initial piece of parchment, the big part that you're going to have writing on, is going to be. Once you get to these little bits here, you're going to have the paper folding in, then coming back out again to have the next layer, like so. So you're going to have that diagonal part from the end of the initial piece joining onto the bit that's going back out again. You're also going to have a vertical or almost vertical part behind the initial piece of parchment. So I'm going to use a little curved bit of paper here to show you exactly what I mean. So if you imagine this is the scroll, so you've got the right hand end of the scroll there, the parchment folds down like so. And this is the effect that you're going to be going for when you are painting these parchments. So I'm just going to cut a little bit of a V in there because that's how they always seem to end. Like so. So you can see on this bit of paper that you have the little angle bits folding in on each layer that it comes down. So you've got the vertical on the parchment, and then you've got the vertical which is poking out beneath the parchment as well, where it's curled round, and it's curling round to come back out again and to become visible. So that's those two bits, like that. Got the length bit and those bits there, like so. So whenever you're drawing or painting the parchments, I find the easiest thing to do is cut yourself a curved piece of paper, and then when you get stuck and you're not too sure which way it's going, you can then get a little bit of paper out, fold it how you want it to be if you haven't done already, and then you can just look and easily see exactly where you want to have those folds and where you're going to be able to see the parchment behind itself or in front of itself. So here we're using Rakarth flesh to paint these parchments. Now you can see the initial one that I've done here, because this was done quite some time ago, has got little faint outlines drawn in pencil on where the folds are going to be. So to show you this, I'm just going to go over all of these with some Rakarth flesh. Lighten it up a little bit so that we have a nice smoothish layer of Rakarth flesh. Now this is one of the shoulder pads for one of my knights that I still haven't finished, so I really do need to pull my finger out with that. So once you've got the Rakarth flesh down, you're going to use a little bit of Citadel Seraphim Sepia shade like you would do if it was a real one that's moulded onto the miniature, and you're just going to give the whole thing a bit of a coat of that. You don't need to be too thick with it, you don't want to have big pools of it, you just want to give it that darker colour so that when you start reapplying the Rakarth flesh again, you are going to have the darker area where the folds are, and then you can paint on the lighter areas and start building up the lighter areas and highlights. So back to the Rakarth flesh again. I'm going to start reapplying this. Now I find it easiest to draw the verticals in first for the sections of parchment, because you can see exactly where they end and which parts are going to be overlapping which. I always try and do these with a sort of like a slight bump at the top and a slight bump at the bottom, as though it's maybe made of cloth and it's sagged slightly, if that makes sense. So rather than having a completely straight line, you want to have it slightly rounded at the top and bottom and bending in, so you've got like a little concave in the middle of each end. Just going to speed up a little bit here because this does take quite some time to do. So I'm using the Citadel small layer brush to put these colours back in. What I try to do when I'm filling these is leave a little bit of shade towards each end and a little bit at the bottom, so there's maybe a slight concave or a slight indent running across the bottom of the scroll. And you may have a slight bit at each end where it's curved in, where it initially bends around from the piece of scroll behind it. So if you get the main initial kind of panels done first, you know exactly where your scroll sections are that you're going to be scribbling on when you come to write whatever it is you want to write on them. And then once you've got these on, you can start going over the edges of where the scroll is bending round and curling. So here you can see that I'm picking out the section where the scroll is curling round behind the second piece of kind of panelling. That's what I'll refer to it as, although it's a bit of the scroll. But you can see where you've got that top line that goes in a kind of S shape to join up with the panel behind, or the panel in front I should say. And we have that top there. I always find it easier to do the top first because you can work out exactly how it's going to be formed and how it'd work. But as I say, if you do get stuck and you're not sure where it's going, you can use the bit of paper with the scroll on, always handy to have, and just work out exactly where those folds are going and what's going to be folding around where. So here, for example, I started painting this and I was looking at it thinking, I'm not really too sure how that's going, so I needed to fold the paper to work out exactly how I wanted it so that the scroll would work, like so. So now that you know where your scroll's going and the way it's meant to be, you can now paint on those sections and get those top layers done. Because this is just the Rakarth flesh layer, it doesn't really stand out against itself at the moment. But now we are going to add a little bit of Vallejo White, or whichever white you're going to use to brighten it up a little bit. I'm going to start tracing around those top edges of each part of the scroll so that we can see exactly where it's bending and we know exactly what we're going to be painting and how. So you can see there where that curls around and joins the top of this panelling of scroll. And you can follow that top diagonally up right, then it's going to curl round and go diagonally up left. So I do find it easiest to pick out these lines and work out where they are going, where the edges of the scrolls, where it bends and twists behind itself. I find it easier to pick out those first before you start working on the panels on this layer and the subsequent layers, just because it gives you the exact outline that you're working to. You can work out where the shades would be and where it's going to be brighter and darker and that kind of thing. I'm going to speed up now so you can see how this progresses. Let's say if you follow the top edges of the panels and the scroll, you'll be able to work out where those zigzags go a lot easier than if you're working on the bottom and trying to work out how they go from the bottom of those panels, like so. It's a lot easier if you work from the top of the panel beneath. Now the actual shoulder pad here is part of that picture of the Emperor and Horus. I'm just having a check of where that scroll at the bottom is going to be going and making sure that I get that matched up. As I say, the shoulder pad is part of the picture with the Emperor on the stairs and Horus standing over Sanguinius. And for one of my knights, I'm having this on the one pauldron and Horus on the other. And also possibly Sanguinius having a snooze on the big cloth piece that hangs down from the waist of the knight. Now I'm going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. I'm going to start highlighting these parts again and making sure that they stand out that little bit more. make them a little bit more obvious. As with before, you don't want to do all of the top sections of this. You want to be picking out certain areas to highlight, because this is how you are highlighting one of the ones that's moulded onto your miniature. So you've got to think about how they would be highlighted. If it's easier, get one of the little shoulder pads with the scroll on so that you can work on that alongside the one that you're freehanding, and that'll give you the idea of where those creases are going and where the shades going and things like that too. If you do paint over any areas and make them a bit too bright, you can always go back through with a little bit of Seraphim Sepia and just lightly touch that up, just darken that down a little bit more, and that will get those shades back where you need them. Really should get back to finishing this shoulder pad at some point, I'm sure. It'd be interesting seeing any of the freehanding from images and things like that that you can do, or anything specific freehanding, just sing out in the comments and we'll see what we can do. It's good fun to practice. It's also not as hard as it looks. Now for the final layer, we're going to use a little bit more white. Add that to the mix, and we're just going to be picking out top edges and a few little bits here. This is mainly to make the creases and the edges stand out a bit more. We're going to do like a little bit of almost like cross hatching across parts of the scroll, just to give them almost like a little bit of texture, and also to highlight them slightly. See at the end of each scroll piece here, and doing little horizontal lines down the end, and that's just to give them that little bit of texture, as though it's not just completely flat, it's just giving that a little bit of an effect, just to give it that little bit more detail, so you haven't got big flat areas of the almost beige colour. Now we're just going to cut to a little bit of doing the cross hatching, so you can see what I mean with that. So I'm doing horizontal lines, this using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush. Just do some horizontal lines going across there. Now we're just going to do some diagonal lines crossing that. That's the horizontals, and now onto the diagonals. That just gives a little bit of texture onto those pieces of scroll, so they're not completely flat colour. I think in the middle sections here where I'm doing this would be the area where maybe if it was material that the scroll is made from, it'd be hanging forward a little bit, maybe catching a little bit more light than the other areas on it. So horizontal lines, once you've got them, just do some diagonal stripes on that, or diagonal lines, just to give that little bit of texture. So I'm calling that done on the scroll there. Obviously, if you want to take a lot more time on it, you can get that a lot smoother and a lot neater, but that is the basic principle of how you can get scrolls free-handed onto your miniatures. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel, you enjoy the content, and you'd like to support us, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.